This is Radio Scotland, now Original Masters with John Cavanagh.
And now our long-awaited 30th anniversary programme devoted to Joe Meek. John Cavanagh on Radio Scotland, 92 to 95 FM, 810 medium wave with Original Masters, and a programme today which is really special to me, paying tribute to a great hero, the producer Joe Meek. Starting the show with a couple of his productions, of course, we began with the Tornadoes and Telstar, the legendary instrumental, still Britain's highest ever sales on an instrumental record, some 35 years on. Then we had Mike Berry and the Outlaws, the tribute to Buddy Holly, who died on the 3rd of February 1959, exactly 8 years before Joe Meek died. And Joe was so concerned that his fans wouldn't be upset by the tribute that he invited members of the Buddy Holly fan club to come and hear an exclusive playback at his studio before it was released. They approved, and eventually he received complimentary letters from Buddy Holly's parents and indeed Holly's producer, Norman Petty, so that was okay. Today on the show we're going to be talking to John Leyton, the guy who gave the Joe Meek production house the first #1 with Johnny Remember Me back in 1961. That'll be coming up soon. What an incredible sound it is too. Johnny Remember Me there from John Leyton on Original Masters today as we pay tribute to Joe Meek, who died 30 years ago on the 3rd of February 1967, and the man whose voice was beautifully echoed on that record there, I think, with us now for the show. John Leyton, great pleasure to welcome you to Radio Scotland.
It's a great pleasure to be with you.
Now, having listened to that, I wanted to cast your mind back and tell me just what it was like to actually hear that thing back once it had been completed for the first time. It must have made quite an impression, I would imagine.
Well, I heard it played back in Joe's studio, which was in the Holloway Road in London. And I don't know if your listeners know, but Joe's studio was actually also his home. And it was a maisonette over a leather shop in the Holloway Road. And I first heard it played back with in Joe's studio, and the first reaction that I had was that was that really me singing? Or have you done something secret here that I don't know about? I was actually very impressed with it because up until then I had just simply I was just a simple actor who happened to get into singing and via Joe Meek's studio, and I really couldn't believe it was me. But I must say I was amazed at the overall quality of the record, because, you know, I'd never actually heard anything quite like that before, and I think probably that was Joe's trademark, in that the style and quality that he got to his various recordings were very unique and very Joe Meek.
I think, as far as not having heard anything like that before, I mean, it was a completely unique sound in British pop music, and one which was criticised by some of the die-hard studio operators as being gimmicky, and something that I think at the time you came in for a fair amount of stick for too. You know, people would say, oh, well, you know, Joe Meek's artists, they're not really real artists at all. But here we are, and it's 36 years on, and, well, John Leyton is still very much out there and doing stuff. Yeah,
you're absolutely right. Joe Meek artists were considered to be a product of Joe Meek's recording studio, and very much a Joe Meek recording. I know when Johnny Remember Me first came out, I remember reading one critic in one of the trade papers which said the latest record, or there's the new record out from Joe Meek's studio, is by an actor called John Leyton, who sounds as if he's singing at the bottom of an empty well. And that was the first critic I read on Johnny Remember Me. I thought, oh, this is a good start. But you're quite right. Joe's records did come under a lot of sort of fire and a lot of criticism, because a lot of people felt that they were distorted and they weren't the crystal clear recordings that we had come to expect in those early days in the 60s. Johnny Remember Me was recorded in the summer of 61, so you're quite right. We're now 97, so it's we're in the 36th year now. So I like to think that perhaps it's lasted reasonably well. I think Joe Meek was so ahead of the field and so ahead of his time, and not frightened to experiment. And I mean, he would the sounds that he got on the tracks were extraordinary. I mean, you'd be running through a number in his studio, and, for example, somebody would, I don't know, drop a cup and saucer on the floor by mistake, and he'd rush in and say, "Gosh, that sounded good, we'll record that." And you'd find it on a track somewhere.
Well, this incredibly imaginative guy was born Robert George Meek on the 5th of April 1929 in Newington, Gloucestershire, nicknamed Joe after an uncle who had died in World War I. When he was 5, he asked for a gramophone for his Christmas, and that was pretty much the start of the whole fascination with gramophone, with radio, and with all things electrical, building bits and pieces out of bits of junk in a shed on the family's farm in Gloucestershire. And, in fact, went on to build Newent's first ever television set, even before retailers had them in stock there when he was in his teens. Eventually went into electrical repair, to the RAF, worked in radar there, then moved to London, and finally ended up working up at IBC Studios on things like Radio Luxembourg road shows, and then onwards and upwards to become an engineer on records by the likes of Lonnie Donegan, Humphrey Lyttelton, Johnny Duncan and the Bluegrass Boys, and very much in demand as the first almost producing engineer in those days, which had to lead to his eventual independence as a producer. And also his interest in managing and promoting other artists too. And we're going to hear one of his early things now. This is something by Joy. Cheesy but fun. Let's Go See Grandma there from Joy and Dave from the late 1950s, showing, well, maybe not too many of the hallmarks of what the RGM sound was to become under RGM himself, Joe Meek. And today on Original Masters from Radio Scotland, John Leyton is with us, paying tribute to Joe Meek and marking the 30th anniversary since the man died. Now, that track that we've just heard, John, very much taken on by the influence of, I suppose, somewhere between the Everly Brothers and Nina and Frederick in the sound of that track. But Joe's interests tended to get very much outer spatial, if you like. I mean, his early concept album, I Hear a New World, was something many years ahead of its time. When you actually met the man, how much of this kind of spaciness did you realise in him?
Yeah, he was always he was obsessed almost with the spiritual world. Perhaps obsessed is a bit strong, but he showed a very strong interest in the spiritual world. And I know that I met Jeff Goddard, who was associated with Joe with various songs. Jeff Goddard wrote Johnny Remember Me and various other songs for me. And I think Jeff was also showed a considerable interest in the spiritual world, and I think they were sort of certainly trying to, well, Joe anyway was trying to sort of make contact with Buddy Holly, and whether he was having any luck at it, I don't know, but he maintained that he was. But yes, I think this sort of the spiritual side did seep into his productions. I mean, I can talk about my own songs. For example, Johnny Remember Me is quite a sort of eerie song in that I hear the voice of the girl I loved and lost a year ago, and the sighing of the trees. I mean, it's all a bit sort of spiritual and very much in the way that Joe...
New talent coming along, including at one stage, I believe, a 16-year-old Rod Stewart, who appeared with a band called the Moontrekkers, but Joe wasn't really convinced of his vocal abilities at the time, so they ended up doing some instrumentals instead.
Just incredible, isn't it? Yes, I mean, it's just wonderful. I mean, I can't believe that, but you're absolutely right, it is true. And I also believe Tom Jones put his head face in there at some stage, didn't he?
I do believe indeed he did, yeah. It didn't happen at that time, but, well, this is one of the great things ever cut. This is called Night of the Vampire and features a certain Mr. Meek screaming in the introduction.